righty then, let me bring up the next thing we're going to talk about, which is New Zealand designates American Proud Boys and the base terrorist organisations, and we want to welcome to the show disinformation researcher Byron C Clark.
Hello.
Byron, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Hey, I saw you in the chat. I saw you in the chat there talking about Solo. You a fan of Solo?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I quite enjoyed it as a film.
Yeah,
As a standalone Star Wars movie.
Yeah, me too. Rogue One tomorrow night. It was Solo tonight, so we'll keep on going. Hey, thanks for joining us. I think we want to check in first of all. The last time we talked to you, there'd been some sort of threats and danger around some of the work you've done with a certain individual showing up to your workplace. How is all of that at the moment for you? Is everything settling down? Are you okay? What's going on?
Yeah, I've described it as things being kind of back to the baseline when it comes to threats and harassment, and that baseline isn't zero, but it's not as high as it increased to a couple of weeks ago. So. That individual is now saying he's going to go to Napier and confront another one of his critics there. So I don't know if that's actually going to happen or if that's just bluster, but I guess we may see that in the near future.
Are you allowed to get a restraining order against someone who says they're going to do something, or do you need to get it after they do something? Do you know?
You can get it before someone does something. I have a restraining order. I'm going to be soon pursuing one against this individual, but I have one against another person who hadn't confronted me at my workplace, but had essentially threatened that he would and encouraged his followers to. And to get a restraining order, it's really just a matter of showing a period of harassment that is escalating, and it's not. You don't necessarily have to wait right until they've actually come and confronted you or something. Although I assume a judge would be more likely to grant a restraining order in that circumstances than if it was just a lot of social media messages or whatever. But in my experience, you can get one just from the threats. That you don't have to wait till things escalate to that point.
Alrighty. Hey, let's jump into this conversation because one of the questions I want to ask is to talk about whatever the base is. I've never heard of the base until today's conversation. I'm assuming it's a white supremacist or neo-Nazi kind of group. That seems to be what most of these sort of groups are. But Proud Boys and the base are now designated terrorist organisations. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so the base is, indeed a far-right white supremacist group. Their ideology specifically is accelerationism, the idea that there's going to be a coming race war between white people and people of colour, and that they can bring this about quicker by carrying out acts of violence. And so the reason that they've been designated as a terrorist entity, because you can't designate somebody a terrorist entity just based on what they believe. So it's perfectly legal to be a white supremacist group if you're not organising or planning terrorism, but the base had two incidences which are cited in the case that was made by New Zealand police to designate them as a terrorist entity. One was planning the murder of an anti-fascist couple or a couple they believed to be part of a local Antifa group in Atlanta, Georgia, or somewhere in Georgia, sorry, may not have been Atlanta, but they had been planning that. And the other one was a gun rights rally in Virginia after the state government put in some restrictions there. They were planning to attend and had planned to shoot civilians and police officers in order to, accelerate, a violent confrontation. And they were, 3 members were arrested on the way to this, including one member who was Canadian and had come to the US, without using a passport and a visa and whatever, and they also had weapons, including a illegal, fully automated assault rifle. So they haven't actually carried out any terrorist attacks, but they have planned at least 2, and that was the evidence that New Zealand police used to get them designated a terrorist entity. And in the case of the Proud Boys, the evidence there was their plans and actions at the January 6th insurrection. Not everybody who participated in that, was a terrorist. A lot of them were, protesters with varying degrees of whether they were a peaceful protester or whether they were a quite militant protester. But in the case of the Proud Boys, they had discussed beforehand about how if they found, say, Mike Pence or Nancy Pelosi, they would kill them, and talked about this. And this is some of the stuff that's all coming out with the with the committee inquiry into those
Yeah.
events that's happening in the US
Wasn't
right now.
wasn't that just we did quite a big deep dive into that last night and did like a 20-minute piece on it and showed about 6 different clips. Wasn't that fascinating to know that Trump knew that there was weapons there and he was happy for the weapons to come into his part of the rally because he knew that the weapons weren't there to be used against him. That was just shocking beyond belief.
Yeah, the more news that comes out about this, the worse it's looking for Trump, in terms of what he knew and what he was, either encouraging or turning a blind eye to, in terms of what some of the more extreme groups, were planning or doing. And that's a point as well in the case made by police for designating the Proud Boys as a terrorist entity. It talks about their links with a number of other groups, like militia groups like the Three Percenters and Patriot Prayer and other groups like this, which haven't themselves been designated terrorist entities. But I'm wondering, reading this case the police have made, if maybe they're preparing something for some of those other groups as well. But of course that criteria is there. In the United States, it's not illegal to be a member of a militia, not illegal to have legal firearms as long as you've got the proper license. It's only if those groups have been found to, been planning a terror attack, which I guess we may, as this hearing continues into the January 6th events, maybe we will learn more about some of these other militia groups.
Yeah.
So I believe that the Proud Boys have some affiliate groups in Australia. Are there any links to groups here in New Zealand?
Mm. They definitely tried to start a chapter in Australia. One of the interesting things about the designation as a terrorist entity is it's specifically the American Proud Boys, because the Australian chapter or other chapters in Canada haven't been proven to be planning terrorist attacks. So it's actually not illegal to be a member of the Proud Boys in New Zealand or in Australia. I may be wrong in Australia. I'm not quite sure how the anti-terrorism legislation works there, but certainly in New Zealand, it's not illegal to be a member of a New Zealand chapter of the Proud Boys, but you would be violating the Terrorism Suppression Act if you provided any material support for the American group. And yeah, in terms of the Australian group, they had targeted people from another far right group, the Lad Society, who had indicated that they felt that the Lad Society wasn't extreme enough and they wanted something more radical, more militant. And it's notable here that before he moved to New Zealand, the man who would go on to become the mosque shooter in 2019, he was targeted for recruitment by the Lad Society. So, there's the especially those trans Tasman links. It's the same people communicating in the same network. So while they never really had a presence here, it's certainly possible that there was some communication there between likely Australian members of the base and some people in New Zealand. And we do know that at least one Action Zealandia member had tried to make contact with them to send them a message of support and prayer, not real support but ideological support for what they were doing. This was the member who also talked about wanting to found a terror cell in New Zealand.
I was interested that I think it was Chris Hipkins talking about that it was a News Hub item talking about that this designation gets made at the Prime Minister's discretion. Obviously, she'll be taking advice on that, but it seems that it's something that a Prime Minister in New Zealand can sort of make this decision that this is going to be designated a terrorist group. I'm wondering as well, is this more a symbolic thing for New Zealand, or will there be a reason? Like, for example, will they know that something's going on? Maybe there are some supportive groups from within New Zealand feeding into the Proud Boys, so it's like a like a whatever you call it, a stopping before something happens, or is this more symbolic from a left-wing democracy saying we're not going to stand for this around the world, so we're just going to let the world know that we say no to this officially?
Yeah, I did wonder about that, and I was briefly on Radio New Zealand earlier today talking about this as well. And at that point, I said, it seems a bit symbolic because these groups aren't active here, but it shows, that we're concerned about the issue of far right terrorism because our intelligence agencies are saying this is the biggest threat right now. It's not Islamic terrorism or left wing extremism or whatever. It's far right extremism. So that could be the reason. I have found myself wondering if maybe there is a bit more that the public doesn't yet know. We have a soldier who was a member of a far right group awaiting court martial, and he's been awaiting for about 2.5 years now. It seems to really be dragging on, but we know that he's been accused of multiple counts of espionage and other things there, and providing information that could compromise security to what he believed to be a representative of a foreign entity. And the other Action Zealandia member I mentioned who had tried to contact the base, I know that he's also a member of the Defence Force, or was at least, and he has a no contact order with this other person who's awaiting trial for court martial. So all
Wow.
of that stuff is making me think, oh, is there things that GCSB, SIS know about New Zealand connections to these groups that the public doesn't know yet? And I'm careful. I don't want to speculate too much, but it's definitely, there's definitely questions that are there, and I'm looking forward to is not the right right way to phrase it, but I am anticipating this court martial, so we can find out some more information as to exactly what the soldier was doing, who he was communicating with, what links he has to both local and foreign far right groups, because I think there'll be, there's a lot of unanswered questions right now, and I'm looking forward to getting some answers to that.
Hey, we had a question that came in quite near the start of the show. It's to do with the Proud Boys, and we'll put it up there because the lovely Ben gave us a super chat. So if you're out there, you're more than welcome to give us a super chat. Ben said first of all, he thanked us for our show without the usual media spin, which was great. Thank you. The question is our take on Gavin McInnes. I said I'd wait to have a chat with you about this. From Vice founder to Proud Boys, because there seems to be a bit of conjecture around there about Gavin McInnes. Some people, and when I say some people, I'm thinking specifically of Joe Rogan, because I've heard him talk about it, think that Gavin McInnes says he started up the Proud Boys as a joke, and it was based around someone in his radio team who he was making fun of. You're a Proud Boy. And then it escalated into this thing, and now he's basically walked away from it going, this is not what I meant. Other people think it's a calculated decision, what he did, and he's still pulling the strings and wants to be involved with it overall. I mean, you're the researcher. What are your thoughts, Byron, on Gavin McInnes and what he has to do now and historically with the Proud Boys?
Yeah, I guess some of that, again, we can only really speculate. I definitely I'd recommend a book here, which is where I probably have read the most about McInnes, which is Andrew Morance's book, Antisocial Online Extremist Techno-Utopians and the Hijacking of the American Conversation. And so he talks in there about, McInnes's background. He was like in a punk band, and then became like more politically active after the 9/11 attacks, and right-wing politics, being outspoken about Islam. And that was when he resigned from Vice. And when he even before he started his radio show, he was writing for not far right publications, but sort of paleo conservative, little outside the mainstream right wing, but not quite, white nationalist, things like American Conservative and that sort of thing. And when he started his radio show, he would interview people who were white nationalists, and the way he framed it was that he himself is not a white nationalist, but he believes in the right to free speech for these people. Therefore, let's have them on and let them have a say. And often we see this sort of thing often. And there's a term that I've first heard it from Laurie Penny, who's a feminist writer, but she talked about the justification suppression model, and the theory is that rather than somebody directly defending their own bigotry or even expressing their own bigotry, they will vehemently defend the abstract right to express bigotry. So, instead of saying something themselves, they'll, defend the rights of somebody else to say it. So I think here of the Free Speech Coalition raising $50,000 for Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux, they're repeating that they don't believe the same things, but they're putting all this resources into making sure that those viewpoints are heard. And I feel like with Gavin McInnes, it's a similar thing. Like he, may say, "Oh, I'm not a white nationalist," and but you can support the right to free speech without giving a platform to white nationalists. I mean, I support free speech. I think government censorship of speech should be very limited, probably only the most extreme situations. But I don't think that means that I should invite white nationalists on my YouTube channel or a podcast because they have this abstract right. So when people like Evan McGuinness are doing that, I think maybe they're hiding their own views by platforming somebody else who's not afraid to, say the quiet part loud.
Well, we definitely see people doing that here, so it's something to be really wary about, I think. And yeah, I mean, I'm guilty of this. I've looked at the Proud Boys and gone, oh, what? Especially when they were starting off, what a joke! They had that initiation ceremony of
So naming breakfast cereals.
the breakfast cereals while being hit and stuff like that, and you're just like, what a joke these guys are. And now they're walking around with weapons and helmets and shields and all sorts of stuff, and it just looks like it's got well out of hand. Just maybe because they were written off as a joke to start with.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the what we term the alt right or the alternative right. So much of it was memes and jokes, and I heard it described in the early days, maybe 2016 or 2017, as half the people think that it's a serious white nationalist movement, and the other half are true believers, but each half thinks the other half agrees with them. And that's I think that what we've seen in the years since. Some people it may just be a joke and being edgy to participate in this, but for others it's very real.
I've been thinking about National in the last couple of weeks. Apparently they're a political party in this country. I don't think too much about them. And there's been a few comments made by Christopher Luxon over the last few weeks that have kind of, to me, sounded a little bit like very fine people on both sides. The thing that has to be avoided saying publicly by Christopher Luxon, because there is a sector of people who vote for them that are pretty abhorrent in their views, but he can't turn them off because he needs their vote. I'm wondering, I haven't heard a response from Christopher Luxon about this, being designated a terrorist organization. Maybe he has had a response today. What do you think the National Party, who need to not put off all the white supremacists to stop voting for them, which is one of their problems. It's the same as Trumpian America. They have to they get their votes from the white supremacists, so they got to be able to attract them in as well. So how do you think National plays this out, where they probably won't be able to say? Because I've said this before, and that's because maybe I'm a bit of an ideologue and I don't do politics, is like the correct response, and it was about the people getting racist on Christopher Luxon's Facebook page where he used Māori to send regards to a recent death. The only correct response would be if you think that Māori language should not be spoken in New Zealand, then National does not want your vote. So in this instance, in my opinion, the response should be if you adhere to any of these ideologies, if you agree with them, if you're a supporter of, Proud Boy ideology, and if you're someone who would be involved in that world, National does not want your vote. I mean, to me, that's the only appropriate response, but it seems that they're not good at that kind of response, the right in general. Where do you think National goes with this revelation today of this new news?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I hadn't realised, but I don't think any journalist has asked the opposition about it. In fact, we haven't heard from the Prime Minister directly since she's overseas. But it would be good to hear confirmation from Luxon that he thinks this is a good idea. I think in the case of these two groups, they're so clearly terrorist groups that I think that it wouldn't alienate a significant chunk of National's voters to to endorse the decision. That's less the case in some other issues. I mean, there's been this whole thing this past week around abortion with the overturning of Roe versus Wade in the US, where Nationals really trying to have their cake and eat it too by Luxon saying that he won't change the settled law, but also saying that he personally believes that it's murder. And then you've got other MPs like Simon O'Connor saying it was a great day when the law was overturned, and it's I think the vehemently anti-abortion, anti-choice sector of New Zealand's electorate is pretty small, but it's pretty committed, because if you really believe it's murder, and you would maybe be a single issue voter. And I think
Yeah.
for National, they do want to get that, even if it's just 1 or 2% of the population, because that could be the difference between forming a government and being in opposition. And they've really got to try and play their cards to keep that support while not losing their more centrist support. So while I don't think they're going to do that on the issue of the base and the Proud Boys, because they're very extreme groups who I don't think very many people in New Zealand would support, I certainly see a little bit of pandering to more of the political fringe on some of these issues like abortion. And a few years ago we saw that on the UN Migration Compact as well. And we see a similar thing with David Seymour and all his free speech absolutism, which his politics aren't aligned with the far right, but I see them praising things that he's advocating, like not having any hate speech laws, and then even removing the inciting racial disharmony from our existing Human Rights Act. And it's not that David Seymour is a white supremacist. I don't believe he is, but he advocates for laws that would make white supremacists have an easier time of doing what they do and be less likely to face consequences for that. So something to think
just before you jump in, Chewie, I see you're in there. I just wanted to make this point because I hadn't thought of it before. If you truly believe that abortion is akin to murder, which is what Luxon said, and you don't actively try and get abortion stopped, doesn't that mean by definition you're pro-murder?
Which is, I think, why
if you believe it's murder, but you're like, but we're not going to do anything about it, that means you're pro-murder. Whereas if you don't believe it's murder and you support it, that's very different. But if you do believe it's murder, that means you're saying, I am for murder. I'm not going to do anything about murder, which is where one with those religious beliefs gets hoisted by their own petard when they get into politics.
Yeah, which is why I think there's so much skepticism around Luxon's statement. I mean, I've seen people who may be more inclined to support the National Party, posting the statements he's made saying it won't be overturned, and people should stop panicking. But I think even if he said that, if he also believes it's murder, you've got to at least ask, well, hang on, how much is this guarantee? Are you really guaranteeing that if you believe it's murder?
I just wanted to circle back to something you said about David Seymour, that you don't believe he's perhaps a white supremacist as such, but he certainly gives a lot of oxygen to those people. He can't be unaware of the people that he's talking to. I know your your individual that is bothering you at the moment certainly cornered him in a meeting in Ashburton, and I've never seen a human being wish he was a turtle so quick in his life. He must know that those are the people that he's talking to, surely.
Yeah, I think he does. I mean, he's a smart man. I think he's making that political calculation, and at that incident when he was confronted like that, and he had to come out and say, well, no, you don't necessarily have a right, and that's in line with his own sort of libertarian beliefs that Seymour probably wants employers to be able to fire people for much more than what Lee Williams was fired for. But Lee Williams did that because he really believed that Seymour would be on his side on this issue, and was furious when Seymour was not on the side of the freedom movement. And I think just like the saying, with National getting 1 or 2% of the vote could be the difference between forming a government and not forming a government. With with ACT, it's where they're a small party, it's a couple of extra MPs. It's a lot more influence if you can get that. And I certainly know during the 2020 election, I was following the New Conservative Party on Facebook as a sort of alt-right adjacent populist party, and I would get sponsored ads for the ACT party that would say, a vote for Conservative is a wasted vote. And, I'd look at why because you can look on Facebook at why you got a particular ad, and it'd be, people aged 18 to whatever in New Zealand who like the New Conservative Party. So ACT was very much out there trying to get new Conservative voters to vote for ACT. So, it's a very deliberate strategy of like looking at how parties to their right are doing, and then working out how they could pull in some of those voters without alienating their more moderate or centrist voters.
Yeah. Hey, listen, we're going to start to wrap now. This is just one other question, I guess, that's come in from One-Eyed Cat. And it doesn't need a long answer, I guess, if either of you guys want to jump in. And they're talking about QAnon. Should QAnon be given the same designation? I guess one of the problems I see with that straight away is who is QAnon and where is the organization to sort of label that way? They're a bit more of a non-organized organization, but I don't know. But I guess the ideologies around QAnon could lead to similar places. Should that get that same designation?
Yeah, so under the Terrorism Suppression Act, it wouldn't be possible for QAnon to get that designation because it's not an organisation. You need an organisation that people are members of that has then planned or carried out a terror attack, and certainly while people have been inspired by the QAnon conspiracy theory to do things like turn up at Comet Ping Pong in Washington DC with a loaded weapon and shoot a closet door trying to get into the basement and things like that. There's no organization behind QAnon. The man who did that in that example was just somebody who read a lot of QAnon stuff online and wasn't even in touch with that many other people who are part of QAnon. I guess that gets at a part of the problem with dealing with far right terrorism is that people are people are self-radicalizing. Like the Christchurch shooter has been designated a terrorist entity, but he wasn't a member of an organization. So there's we can't solve the problem of far right terrorism just by designating every group and individual a terrorist entity, because there'll be people who just aren't even on the radar. And I think that's possibly the case now. I think if there's another far right terror attack in New Zealand, it's not necessarily going to be somebody who's part of a group like Action Zealandia. It's more likely to be somebody who may listen to their podcast and may be in a bunch of Telegram groups with similar ideology, but isn't necessarily involved. And, the Terrorism Suppression Act isn't going to allow us to preemptively prevent that terror attack necessarily. So, a bit of a bleak note to end on, I guess. But
Yeah, is what it
yeah,
is, though.
yeah,
All right.
there's
Anything
limitations. Yeah.
anything else you want to throw out there, Chewy, before we move on and wrap up?
No, I'm all good there.
Hey, Byron, thanks for joining us, mate. Always appreciate your
Thank you.
insight and appreciate you coming on today. And I'm sure we'll talk to you again real super soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Byron.